It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor. Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Good, thanks.
Another dull week.
Who can keep track? What was going on last week?
Anyway, also with us, Rachel Donadio, Europe editor for The Atlantic. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks.
All right. Also with us, France 24's Sanam Chantier.
Hello, François.
Nice to see you as well. And Pierre Aski, president of Reporters Without Borders, who's hard at work book writing, he says.
Yes, finishing a book on China.
Oh, well, we'll talk about China a little bit later on.
Yes.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. And it feels like every week we're asking if the President of the United States is in deep doo-doo. Donald Trump denying over Twitter, asking Democratic lawmakers at a Wednesday meeting at the White House about immigration. Quote, why are we having all these people coming from, pardon the expression, shithole countries? Several sources quoted by the Washington Post, which has Trump asking the follow-up question, why do we need more Haitians? Take them out, said the President of the United States, responding with several tweets, including one in which he says, never said anything derogatory about Haitians, other than Haiti is obviously a very poor and troubled country, never said take them out, made up by Dems. I have a wonderful relationship with Haitians, probably should record future meetings. Unfortunately, no trust. Exclamation point, Christopher Dickey.
Look, why does anybody believe anything that Trump says about anything? He's constantly reversing what he says. He says one thing one day, another thing the next day. And it's all part of his power play to begin with. It's, I say this, you have to believe it because I'm such a powerful SOB. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. Of course, he said the things the Washington Post is quoting him as saying. There were multiple sources who heard him say it. They're not going back on it. Some of them are going absolutely on the record saying he said these things. But he's a little embarrassed, and so he dials it back slightly. Remember, this is a guy who learned from a very ruthless lawyer named Roy Cohn two important rules. One of the most important was never apologize for anything. And the other one was, if you get hit, hit him back 10 times harder. That's the way he operates on everything. So he says what he wants. If you call him out on it, then he says, go to hell, you were lying, and that's the game he plays. It's a great position to have for a president.
And a week ago at the same time, you were predicting that this book, Fire and Fury, would blow over. And effectively, we're not talking about it anymore, even though there's...
What can I say? I'm prescient. You know, I see the future.
No, but in the case here, it's...
No, but this is the news cycle turns over so quickly. And the atrocious behavior of President Trump is such that one way to get people not talking about Fire and Fury, I don't think this was intentional, but one way to get them to stop talking about it is to do something that's even more outrageous than anything that's in the book.
There's been bipartisan criticism of the president. Republican lawmakers have said this is outrageous. There's one of Haitian descent who said this is absolutely insulting and not what my family came to the United States expecting. You know, on the Statue of Liberty, it doesn't say go back to your shithole countries, right? And I wonder whether that will lead to something. But the real question is, what is Congress going to do? I mean, it's operating in the context of a Congress, and then we're just following on Twitter what the president said in these behind closed doors.
Well, let's remind viewers of why they were in the room in the first place, right, which was to present this bipartisan effort to have some kind of new measure on immigration.
Yeah, which I think that the reports from the meeting with Senator Durbin and Senator Graham, I don't think they feel that they're ready to move forward with it right now, because now it's just, now the news cycle is all. It's not just the news cycle, but we're talking about the president's remarks. What happens now with the bill?
Sanam Chantier, when you watch the story, do you think, America's changed, or this is just one guy in the White House?
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because earlier today I had a statement from the government of Botswana, one of the first countries to actually react to this, saying that they've summoned the ambassador of the United States to the country to try and clarify these comments about African immigrants being from B-pole countries and what have you. And the reaction that you're seeing certainly online across social media is they're saying we can't say that just because this is coming from one person, this is the opinion of Americans as a whole. So he himself is being held accountable here. And as Chris said earlier, this is not the first time that we're hearing such outrageous comments coming from the US president.
But it's been reverberating a lot this time. I mean, if you look at the flow of reactions from Africa, from both governments and civil society, it's huge. And usually governments don't react to Trump's extravagance. They play it diplomatically. And here you had, I was looking at the tweet from the president of Senegal. You mentioned Botswana. The ambassador was summoned and he was asked, is Botswana part of the shithole countries? I mean, this is quite incredible. And the U.S. ambassador to Panama resigned because he said he could not serve this administration anymore. I mean, there is a kind of escalation in what has been tolerated until now in terms of Trump's personality, which today is really harming the U.S. position and activities around the world.
Yeah, I think the spokesman for the UN Human Rights Commission was the person who maybe put his finger on it the best. The question here is not just what countries were called shitholes and which were not called shitholes. The question here is one of the president's absolutely evident racism. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Later on, we might talk about Germany agreeing on a coalition, right? One of the terms of the coalition is they want to filter a little bit better who comes into the country. They want more skilled immigrants and less unskilled immigrants. Is it just a more sophisticated way of saying let's have Norwegians come into the country, which is what Donald Trump said?
No, I don't think it is. First of all, I don't think that's the kind of policy that they're talking about. Secondly, they've let in 1 million immigrants, for God's sake. I think that's a little different than the kind of thing that Trump is talking about. Thirdly, it's revealing, his language is revealing. It's not like he's making a general principle or he's thought this through. This is what he thinks, this is the way he talks, and it is the talk of a racist. There's no question about it. If he had not mentioned Norway, maybe we could have said, oh, well, okay, a lot of these countries really are benighted countries. They really are having a difficult time. We interviewed a guy in Haiti, a young man, who said, yeah, this is a shithole. But that doesn't mean that the people don't have pride. That doesn't mean that you can sacrifice their dignity. And it doesn't mean that it's a shithole just because they have dark skin, which is what he implied in that statement, more than implied in that statement.
Merkel is in hot water because of letting in 1 million immigrants, which has weakened her position. But when you compare the moral authority to the approach that she took in saying we're Germany and with our history we're not closing the doors to these 1 million people, even if slowly many
and they're not closing
leaving.
the door in the platform that they've put forth so far.
No, they're moderating it in ways to kind of hold on to power, but it's such a different approach than Trump's.
All right, earlier in the week, the U.S. government, and further on this issue of how it deals now with immigrants, announcing it was deporting 200,000 refugees who'd fled El Salvador after a devastating earthquake in 2001, leaving open the possibility that Haitians who came in the wake of the 2007 quake there, thanks to the same temporary protected status, could also soon be forced to go. El Salvador, today mired in poverty and infested by gang violence.
The cancellation is very worrying for me. But I hope that we can arrange something in these 18 months, a status so we can stay in the country. Because I know that my country is very dangerous because of the gangs.
Yeah, that cleaning woman saying she doesn't want to go back to El Salvador infested by gangs. It's a tricky one, isn't it? The Trump administration can argue this isn't a dictatorship. They have democratic elections. Why should we keep them here?
And I think similar arguments have been made, certainly when he decided to sign that executive order banning 7 countries originally from entering the country, even though some of them were refugees. And actually, François, let me bring you the Iran angle here, because this is particularly interesting. The argument started pouring in that you are targeting some countries that you decide are quote-unquote shitholes. You're saying that, for example, the Iranians, and they have their own arguments, why is it that even though we haven't really carried out an attack on the United States since, I believe it was the 70s up until 2015, and you don't have the likes of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on that list. In addition to that, you have more US nationals that are in the country that are becoming terrorists than anyone named from the 7-list country, the original, certainly. And so it's a case of, and speaking to people in Salvador and Haiti today, they're all saying, why is it that there's certain countries are being targeted and others that are not in allegiance with the United States not?
This question, of course, has been put forth as well for countries that wound up on that list of banned nations, which is clearly a Muslim ban, although that's not how it's
mostly.
But except for Venezuela.
Which was later introduced.
The strange thing, is in terms of America's self-interest, the U.S. is the home of the theory of soft power. And soft power is the way to have influence without having to spend a cent, because your values and your image does it for you in a way. And here, Trump is inventing the anti-soft power. I mean, whatever he does, whatever he says, is creating a bad name for the U.S. all over the world, and it's really weakening its diplomatic, economic, and political standing. And that's hard to understand. What has he got to gain in being offensive to the rest of the world? And that's really the question. Some people in Beijing are joking that Trump's policy is make China great again, because China is the main beneficiary of this weakening of the U.S. standing at the moment.
On that score, Donald Trump this week announcing that he was going to Davos. Last year, it was Xi Jinping, the star of the show.
Yes.
Were you surprised when you saw that?
I was surprised because, Xi Jinping was there. He made this speech about free trade, and he was suddenly the star of the international business community. What is Donald Trump going to tell them? Especially after the last sequence, and that's very strange. Especially as in the same trip he was supposed to stop in London to open the new embassy. And can you imagine that the U.S. president, 1 year after being in office, has still not been to the UK, which is the number one ally of the United States?
I can imagine he hasn't been there, but I can't imagine that he suddenly decides that he's not going to go there and says it's because he doesn't like the price that was paid for the embassy on Grosvenor Square.
And he blames Obama when the move was decided by Bush before.
But there is now a Trump statue in Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, so don't worry.
He is there.
One final question on this. The institutions in the United States, Rachel Donadio, are they weakened or not? Because we saw, for instance, blowback from a federal judge this week who suspended the deportation of so-called dreamers, illegal aliens born in the United States but who've since grown up.
Yeah. I think how could they not be weakened? I mean, there's a difference between the president's rhetoric and the daily functioning of the institutions of state. But when a president says that, how could they not be weakened? I think they're weakened. And
just a reminder here, there's also a difference between everything we're talking about and the functioning of the American economy right now.
Which is doing
Stock market is setting records day after day. Unemployment's low. Black unemployment is the lowest it's been since 1972 when they started keeping records. All of that is working in his favor. Pension funds, private pension funds that were in big trouble before, are now doing much better because the stock market's gone up. All of these things are things that you cannot ignore. We may have Nero or Caligula as our ruler, but the economy is doing pretty well.
Staying with U.S. politics, the week began with the hashtag Oprah for President after actress and renowned TV personality Oprah Winfrey gave a rousing speech at the Golden Globe Awards, the first big Hollywood ceremony since the New Year's launch of the Time's Up movement to battle abuse and sexism in the entertainment industry. That too seems to have died down a little bit since the start of the week, Chris.
We have no memory. It just turns over so quickly. And part of the test of Oprah now will be if she really is serious about running for president, and it sounds as if she just might be, will she find a way to start dominating the news cycle herself? certainly not the way Trump does. But to inject herself into issues, to give another speech here, another speech there, we're a long way from the presidential election. I think we'll see her coming back, and we're going to see her campaigning for people in critical constituencies in the midterm elections that are coming up later this year. So she'll come back. But yeah, as a super headline that everybody's talking about and everybody's tweeting about, no, she's history already.
That was So Tuesday, right?
Yeah, that's So Tuesday.
I mean, she is one of the most respected figures in the United States worldwide. I think she gave a great speech. But then the question is, do we want another celebrity president?
And will this
Qualified to take over? Certainly not.
Will this reinforce stereotypes in places like Iran? If you have a former reality TV host against a...
We've reached the point where the Iranians are really happy that the United States have Donald Trump, because they say we previously had Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So it'll just give them more tools to mock the US with, I think.
I have to say, I think this question of just another celebrity misses the point completely when we're talking about Oprah Winfrey. First of all, she is again and again talked about as one of the most respected people in the United States, not just one of the most respected women. She has a constituency. She has built an empire, but not an empire of branding that's just about putting names on buildings.
Does that make her personality? That would be potentially the leader of the free world, someone who can make foreign policy decisions.
So look at the political spectrum in the United States.
I think the bar is set very low now with Donald Trump.
That's the issue, is that we have a political desert, and
it's not a political
she's shining
desert. It's not a political desert.
The others are not
Donald
existing.
Trump paved the way for the likes of Oprah.
You could say Ronald Reagan paved the way. For God's sake, he was a cowboy actor, and a poor one at that. I mean, and many people think he was the greatest goddamn president we've had in years. So I don't think that we can say Donald Trump paved the way for Oprah Winfrey. What I do think you can say is that in a lot of America, not the East Coast, not the West Coast, but in a lot of America, if you are a television personality who is in people's houses every day or every week, and they feel that they know you, that is hugely valuable for a political player.
If Russia was the United States, then Putin would lose his next presidential election because he has a TV host opposed to him, but he's going to win.
but is it a good idea? It's a double-edged sword. Is it better to have, quote, professional politicians or not?
I don't think it's necessarily good to have professional politicians, but it is the sign of the disarray of the Democrats that there is no one, not a single personality. Maybe it's too early, and maybe we have to wait for the midterm elections, which will be the real test.
It isn't just America. Is Macron a professional politician or not? What was his background as a professional politician? He doesn't have any background as a professional politician. He was an outsider who was very charismatic. True, yes. He wasn't a TV personality, but he's certainly not a professional politician.
All right, we'll come back. We'll have more. You're watching the world this week.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
In 1976, 10 years after seizing power in the Central African Republic, President Bokassa proclaimed himself emperor. 14 years of bloodthirsty dictatorship later, France put an end to his reign. But the country has struggled ever since to establish good governance. In the face of interreligious massacres and a choice between exile or a ruined economy, some have begun to regret the passing of Bokassa's regime.
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
Here at France 24, we're taking a broad outlook by talking about the women who are reshaping our world.
في فرانس 24 لا ننسى ونحجز لكم أسبوعيا تذكرة عودة للمدن والمناطق التي كانت في قلب الأحداث قبل أن تدخل في طي النسيان.
France 24, c'est la recherche permanente des meilleurs spécialistes pour vous permettre de déchiffrer l'actualité.
أخبار سياسية واقتصادية وثقافية وأيضا رياضية بأعين خبراء رياضيين. هذه هي قناة فرانس 24.
The Observer's Direct.
Ici en Tunisie, sur le mont Semama, notre observateur Adnan Hilali initie des jeunes à différentes activités artistiques. C'est une façon pour lui de lutter contre leur envie d'émigrer vers l'Europe, alors qu'aujourd'hui, la Tunisie fait face à une vague de départs clandestins vers le vieux continent sans précédent depuis la révolution de 2011. Nous irons à la rencontre de ces jeunes et de leurs rêves d'Europe qu'ils imaginent parfois en véritable paradis.
The Observer's Direct on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. You're watching France 24. And before we resume the world this week, the big story that will be following for you at the top of the hour, Donald Trump announcing that he is going to extend sanctions relief for Iran, but it'll be the last time, he says. Our correspondent Philip Crowther in Washington has more.
The White House says that U.S. President Donald Trump has decided to waive the sanctions on Iran, on Iran's central bank, and on its oil exports for one very last time. These are the sanctions relief, that essentially keeps the nuclear deal in place. Considering this is the last time Donald Trump will be signing this waiver, this puts the nuclear deal with Iran in very, very serious danger in the coming months. The White House says senior administration officials who briefed us a short while ago, in fact, say that this White House wants to renegotiate the deal, first of all with its European partners, but it also wants to work on a different version with the U.S. Congress, one that has new triggers built in that would trigger new sanctions and could essentially end the landmark nuclear deal. The White House says that this president and this administration would be interested in a renegotiated deal, but that would have to happen very, very quickly indeed. For now, the nuclear deal stays in place. But what this administration is insisting on this Friday is that it might be waiving some sanctions, but it is imposing brand new ones. 14 individuals and entities will be sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury this Friday. They include the head of Iran's judiciary, for example, the head of one of Iran's prisons. The reason why is the crackdown, says the White House, of demonstrations that were happening in Iran over the last few weeks. These entities and individuals are being sanctioned because of human rights abuses and censorship, say senior administration officials who gave us a preview of the president's decision on the Iran nuclear deal and on further sanctions on Iran.
And we'll have more on that with our panel as we resume the world this week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, is with us. Welcome back as well to Rachel Donadio, Europe editor for The Atlantic, France 24's Sanam Chantier, and Pierre Aski, president of Reporters Without Borders. We've just gotten the news that the sanctions relief is being rolled over by the U.S. As part of the Iran nuclear deal that was signed in 2015 with all the members of the Security Council plus Germany. And sanctions relief being rolled over. However, Trump saying this is the last time. Has he put a ticking time bomb under the table?
I think this isn't the first time we're hearing this last time that Trump is referring to. It's no secret that Trump himself and various members of the Republican Congress are very much loathing this deal. He's called it the worst agreement ever negotiated. But I think, Francois, we need to remember something. This was not a bilateral agreement. It was negotiated by 7 different countries, Iran and the P5+1 group. And so this isn't a decision that solely relies on Trump, especially because every time the deal is at risk of being derailed, you see European leaders coming out very much guns blazing, saying the deal is working. Iran is complying with the terms of the agreement, and they've said this, the international body, the IAEA, that monitors Iran's nuclear program, not once, not twice, but 9 times. So what is this charade of essentially previously Trump decertifying the deal despite what the international community is saying? It's essentially what us Iran observers are calling a game of diplomatic football. The ball is being passed to the court of the Congress. Congress doesn't want to be responsible for derailing this agreement that seems to be working. They pass it back to Trump. And so it goes back and forth. Now, the problem is with these sanctions that are being introduced, yes, they will target individuals, and so they should, especially when it comes to the judiciary and the crackdown that we've had on Iran, so the head of prison. But if it actually targets the body of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is what's previously been actually threatened, then that's going to affect the average Iranian, because, of course, we have a military system that's compulsory in Iran, as they do in Israel. So the average person that's forced to go and serve in the military will be essentially targeted and be referred to as a terrorist as a part of the following bans that may ensue. So for now, I'm not that worried.
For now.
Let me introduce a fairly frightening possibility. In Washington right now, as we reported this week in the Daily Beast, it's very fashionable to say that the deal with North Korea, what should be done with North Korea is what's called a bloody nose military strike. Targeted attacks on North Korea, on their installations, to teach them a lesson, make them pull back, but not provoke them so much that they would destroy the capital of South Korea, which they could easily do. This is a singularly bad idea, but it's a very common one, and it's common around Trump, among the people around him. If you say we are going to certify this time, but we're going to have several months, and then we're never going to do it again, what could happen in that interim? If you demonstrate your power against North Korea, then you intimidate Iran. And believe me, this is the way these so-called strategic thinkers around Trump think. I think this is a very, very dangerous moment. While Congress and Trump are tossing the football back and forth, we also have the possibility of real military action.
But there will be a sense of relief in Europe, maybe short term, but because the Europeans met yesterday.
And France's president was on the phone with Donald Trump.
Yes, they met yesterday morning with Mr. Zarif, the foreign minister from Iran, in Brussels, where they supported the continuation of the deal. Then Macron called Trump to ask him to continue with the deal. So in that sense, the Europeans will feel that they've won the game, at least for the short term, but there's no solution. And, you know, the big question that everybody was asking in Washington was whether the first war would be with North Korea or with Iran. And you've given a guess, but it's true that it's a dead end in both issues.
I think beyond the rhetoric that we're hearing come out of the US administration at the moment, what seems to be actually in the short term putting that Iran deal under threat is the fact that this kind of conversation is creating an environment of uncertainty. And that's why European businesses have been very cautious and frightened, and European banks especially, to start doing the business dealings that had been promised prior to the JCPOA with Iran. So it was, of course, the country scaling back significant parts of its nuclear program in return for sanctions relief. And Zarif said yesterday on the plane back to Tehran, look, we are not reaping the benefits that were promised to us out of this. So if anything, it's reached a point where we may be considering pulling out of the deal.
Well, and it's part of the reasons for the population to be so unhappy in Iran, that they were expecting the dividends of the agreement.
And with the Rouhani administration, there was a problem with managing expectations, trying to show them that decades of draconian sanctions is not going to take days or weeks or months. It's going to take years of recovery. Add to that the fact that it's been a corrupt administration, previous one too, Ahmadinejad.
We were talking before the break about that rousing speech by Oprah Winfrey at the Golden Globes, sort of it's been dubbed a New Day speech when it came to the attitude of women and following the Me Too movement. On this side of the Atlantic, there's Me Too, but there's also the Me Too backlash. Iconic actress Catherine Deneuve, among 100 signatories of a petition that was published in French newspaper Le Monde, entitled "Women Speak Out Another Way." And one example in that petition, it's written, "The frenzy to send pigs to the slaughter, far from helping empower women, in fact serves the interests of the enemies of sexual freedom, religious extremists, the worst reactionaries, and those who deem, in the name of substantive concept of good and the Victorian morality that goes with it, that women are beings that are different, children with adult faces demanding protection. And of course, as you can read there, it's France, so no petition is complete without a quote from a recently deceased analytical philosopher. In this case, one who defends the freedom to offend, which is vital to artistic creativity in the same manner that we defend the right to pester, vital to sexual freedom, the right to pester. Rachel Donadio.
It implies that it's the right of men to pester women, which is, I think, I think that's one of the most problematic things in the letter. I mean, in the context of Me Too and after the Weinstein scandal, I think it's perfectly reasonable to step back for a minute and say, well, what's going on here? The letter raises some interesting points about not rushing to summary judgment, but the right to bother, the right to pester, the right to importuner, that's highly problematic. And the response to that letter has been, who are these actresses and writers and psychologists of a certain generation to tell any other women how they should respond when a man importunes them, when a man pesters them and bothers them? The reactions to this have been super interesting.
The reactions to it have been interesting. One of the women who signed the petition said, I wouldn't have met my husband if he hadn't pestered me.
I feel like no one is saying you can't flirt. The issue is sexual assault, sexual violence, a pattern of that in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein. I mean, there's definitely the problem with the letter is that the line between flirting in a cafe and men completely abusing their power in the workplace, and that's problematic. I mean, I think that the letter, it's also so very French to me. I mean, I'm the American in Paris, and I don't think I have Stockholm syndrome entirely. I can understand the culture that produces this letter, but it's kind of a culture of women who are a little bit cynical, like, okay, men are like that, human nature is like that. This is what I wrote in The Atlantic this week. Men are like that, human nature is like that. So we'll just have to figure out, we'll set our strategy, we'll use,
It is Stockholm syndrome, you think, this letter?
I don't think I have Stockholm syndrome, but what I'm saying is that it comes out of France, where there's a sense of these women are saying, we understand how sexual politics work, we're going to play it to our advantage. Whereas in the United States, we're going to speak out against situations that we now think are problematic and situations of abuse. And the whole reason we're having this conversation in France is because of what happened in the United States.
I think what we can all appreciate with the Me Too Balance ton Port movement is that it created this open, safer space for women to be able to air their grievances when it comes to sexual harassment and assault. But this letter takes it to the extreme. I think it completely misses the point. It talks about these Victorian values. It then goes on to say we're creating a totalitarian state. I mean, I pose this question to you as a woman. Have the whistlings on the streets died down? Do you get less numbers when you go to a bar? Are our colleagues more aware of sort of non-sexual contact with us? Absolutely not. And so because of all this, I decided to take this to the very woman that was at the helm of the Me Too campaign, one of the first Hollywood actresses that actually accused Harvey Weinstein of rape. That's Rose McGowan. And I said to Rose, you're at the helm of this campaign. What do you think? And she said, look, I think I can easily say that pigs don't just come in a male format, women too. And these women, with what they're doing, they're going against history, they're going against humanity, and frankly, a group of stupid women signing their names up against this stupid letter isn't going to make any difference. The momentum's there. We have to draw the line somewhere, because I have seen some conversations on social media with some people saying it's okay for innocent men to be subjected to losing their jobs, even if they haven't committed anything, just to keep the conversation going. I think that's where we have to draw the line.
Well, I think lines are hard to draw, but I also think there's a real generational thing here. I think that for younger women especially, I think to listen to Catherine Deneuve, who's I think 72 years old, making these kinds of statements, 74, who keeps track?
She looks great.
Yes, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't dare. But I think it's also important to understand that in 1971, she was one of 343 women who came out in the so-called Manifesto of the 343 Sluts and said, I have had an abortion. And women's reproductive rights need to be respected, and they need to be legal, and we have to end this.
And it brought a change of the law a few years later.
And it brought a change of the law. And I don't think that a lot of the people who are going on about Me Too right now have ever done anything that's even remotely as brave as that.
The problem, Chris, is that we're talking of a group of privileged women who write about what's happening in the metro. You know, there's the sequence, the paragraph about the metro is totally outrageous, and probably Catherine Deneuve has not been in the metro for except in
since
the
the last
movie.
time she made a movie there. Yeah.
Let's decades.
Let's talk about the metro. This petition even came up during Parliament's question time. The junior minister for gender equality denouncing the parts of the text that she deems are, quote, deeply shocking, if not wrong.
It's hard enough to get young girls to understand that a man rubbing his penis against her in the metro without asking is sexual assault, and that it's punishable by up to 3 years in prison and a €75,000 fine. We have a hard time telling young girls that they shouldn't feel ashamed, that they're not responsible. So I think this kind of talk is dangerous.
Now, in fairness, the petition doesn't condone men rubbing up against you in the metro.
No, it just says you don't have to see yourself as a victim. You should just reclaim your own sexuality. These are all interesting
and it says, and I
debates.
quote, sometimes it's the expression of a great sexual misery, even a non-event.
I think that the issue and some of the responses to this week in Libération and Le Monde carried many, many pieces critical of the letter that it first published. Libé says, who are these women? And they must have a lot of free time to sit around relativizing this and telling us how we should live. But I think that it is generational, and I also think that it's kind of a, you know, the line that you quoted from the philosopher is interesting because this is in some ways about artistic freedom. I mean, I think it's reasonable for these writers to say, why should someone tell me what characters I should put in my novel, which is what inspired one of the authors of this text. But then if you kind of turn that into how other women should behave when opportuned or not, that's a problem. I mean, I think they're conflating. It's kind of like, hands off my text, but I don't mind if they're on my body. This is one of the things I wrote this week in The Atlantic.
Well, I think we have to go back to Dominique Strauss-Kahn's case, because part of the text refers to we don't want to become Puritans like the Americans,
Victorians,
or Victorians, but it uses the word Puritans, which is really referring to the U.S. And part of the reaction in France when Dominique Strauss-Kahn was arrested in New York was not condemning him, but saying, "Oh, the Americans are too Puritans," you know. And then it became a scandal here too, and people started talking about it, and that he had crossed all the red lines. But I think that's what comes out again in this letter, that the politically correctness of the U.S., the Puritan approach to, you know, that if you're in a lift with a woman, you're dead, you know, this kind of caricature that is being given of the U.S. society on this side of the Atlantic, I think comes out in that text in a very strong way.
Final word on this. There have been an increase of 20 to 30% of women filing complaints in French police stations when it comes to sexual acts, but it hasn't affected the high halls of power.
No, it certainly hasn't. I think the very small difference that it has made is something we need to embrace, because obviously it's given this, as I mentioned earlier, the space for women to be able to air these grievances. I think you and I were having a conversation earlier today saying that how much has it really impacted, especially industries like ours, where we are susceptible to harassment like this?
We didn't show a lot of love, or at least certain members of this panel, for Donald Trump in part one of our show. But grant him this. I
love the guy.
He's got China's president. He got China's president to play tour guide when he visited Beijing's Forbidden City back in November. They even sat down for tea at one point. So who did France's president get when he too visited the Forbidden City? Well, in Emmanuel Macron's case, it was a French historian. His name is Patrice Favat. There were plenty of photo ops elsewhere with Xi Jinping during that 3-day state visit this week. But not at the Forbidden City, Pierre Aski. Was Macron dissed by the Chinese?
Not at all, no. I think the Chinese were actually expecting him for two reasons. One, trivial, which is that Brigitte Macron is very popular in China, and the Chinese still haven't understood how can a young man be with an older woman. We're back to the previous issue. And so that's part of the story in China. And the second one is that they know that the situation in Europe at the moment. The Brits are out, the Germans are locked up in their coalition talks, and Macron is the new young and bright man in the game. And so they were going to give him a good show, and he gave them back what they wanted, which is support for the Silk Road, the new Silk Road that China is organizing.
So, support, but also on that point,
a critical one.
A critical one. Let's listen. He begins his visit in the central city of Xi'an, starting point of the Silk Roads, and with China developing its One Belt, One Road infrastructure initiative, it goes through Asia into Africa. The French president offering some free advice.
France has the experience of unilateral imperialism in Africa, which sometimes had the worst consequences. And today, with the new Silk Road being created, I think that the partnership between France and China can avoid to repeat these mistakes. And especially choose a path of fairness that I am evoking here today.
Path of fairness. What does he mean?
It means reciprocity. That means the French foreign minister put it more bluntly. He said it can, if it's a win-win situation, one country cannot win twice, which was an elegant way of saying, we don't have fair trade between China and the rest of the world at the moment. What Macron's visit shows is that we've entered a new phase. The first phase was the West patronizing China. It was a backward country. We can give them subcontract for textile. Yeah. The second phase was we're looking for contracts because China is becoming powerful and there's a lot of money. That phase has ended. Now today, people are getting scared. China is too powerful. And we want fair deals with China. And that's what Macron has come to tell. The years of an open game, open bar in the world are over.
And the softly approach, did it work for Macron? He said, I only invoke human rights in private. And when it comes to this fair trade and protectionism, he did speak out a little bit, but it was always in that measured kind of tone we heard.
The question is that has been asked many times in France now is what about human rights? Have we stopped talking about human rights? He says he's doing it privately, which all presidents all over the time have said without showing much results. What is true is that making blunt and open statements wouldn't have produced any results because China is too powerful at the moment to listen to anyone. So we'll have to see whether the Macron methodology works and brings results beyond contracts, which he brought like every visitor to China.
Like every visitor to China. We'll have to leave it there. I want to thank Pierre Aski, Rachel Donadio, Christopher Dickey, Sanam Chantier. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. Emma James, I know you're going to be talking about explicatives out of the mouth of certain Western leaders. One Western leader. It can be lonely at the top. And I noticed the Consumer Electronics Show is on. And so they have this robot now that reverberates your emotions. Maybe we could show images of it. It's called Buddy. And it's all right. Well, hopefully we'll get those images. What do you think of that concept?
Well, it does seem as though the techie bods of the world are trying to get rid of humans right now, because we've got driverless cars, we've got personless friends now with this kind of buddy robot. And one of the weirdest things that I saw about CES online, well, there we go, that is Buddy, the friendly robot. But they're even trying to do away with mobile phones as well. So if you already feel a bit self-conscious when you're chatting on your mobile, just imagine how self-conscious you'll feel when you have one of these new kind of like a wristwatch type thing. And the reverberations mean that you actually talk into your finger. So people will look like absolute lunatics. I don't know.
Right, like in Austin Powers.
Yes, absolutely, very much so.
Well, not everybody's self-conscious.
No, indeed. Well, there you go. There's an image of just how silly you two could look if you want to buy into the latest technology trends.
Not everyone is self-conscious, as we've discovered over the past 24 hours.
Indeed. There does seem to be a bit of a lack of a filter when it comes to some people's comments. Donald Trump, of course, having used exceptionally strong language, and there has been a suitably strong reaction in the media and online. This is the New York Daily News, which has come up with
That's not favourable
brains. No, not so much. It is, of course, the famous poop emoji complete with a Donald Trump quiff. The cartoonists have been having fun with this one too. Pat Bagley from the Salt Lake Tribune came up with this one. Donald Trump's come out of the sewer and he's basically sullying the presidential seal by dragging poop all across it. And this one too from Victor Ndula for the Star in Kenya. And it's Trump's White House map of Africa. And basically it's the S-hole north of the Maghreb, west of the S-hole, central S-hole. You get the gist. Now, the first people to report on this story, it was the Washington Post that came out with this scoop. And, of course, it sparked a debate in newsrooms around the world to say or not to say, because it's something that we're not used to having to deal with when you've got a world leader using this kind of language. Do we say it or do we not? And lots of people do seem to have actually broken down the usual barriers. It's printed in full here in the Washington Post. France 24 is among those broadcasters to be using the full word on air and in its printed matter on our website. But it does raise questions about, are you highlighting the vulgarity of what he said, or are you normalising language that really shouldn't be normalised? And it is a question that a lot of people have been wrestling with these comments. This Twitter user, one of many, to comment on, I wonder how many little kids are using that word in schools today, because, of course, it's been broadcast everywhere. Some of the strongest criticism, though, has come for those who chose not to use it, who chose to be a little bit coy, including MSNBC's Rachel Maddow. This Twitter user saying, please, please do not bleep the word S-hole. I'm choosing not to say it. Just it's a personal thing for me. I don't particularly want to go on air and use an expletive. Say it loud and clear, he says. Americans need to hear the words, this is not normal. And that is an argument that a lot of people are making. There are plenty of people saying the opposite, of course. But this woman says, Rachel Maddow says bleep hole instead of S-hole. Are you on the Disney Channel? Just say what he said. Don't sugarcoat it. And it's an interesting take, that one. NPR chose to, once they changed their policy from not saying it to saying it, they then issued warnings. And this Twitter user saying, sombre warnings that offensive language lies ahead, as if giving your listeners, delicate flowers that they are, time to get to a fainting couch. So it is a real debate online whether or not this language should be used. This person pointing out, it's not the language that's offensive, it's the racism. And that is something that does seem to slightly get lost in this row about whether or not we should use that word. Looking elsewhere, some people have chosen to hit back with facts rather than anything else. 43% of immigrants from S-hole African countries have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 33% of the overall American population. And this Twitter user from Haiti hitting back in possibly the best way imaginable, using a hashtag that's proved very popular today, hashtag S-hole president, and he says, hey, here is what my S-hole looks like, and you see the beautiful island of Haiti there.
I hope Trump doesn't find out that that's where the Clintons went on their honeymoon. Many thanks, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.